Um, Now, we've had 4 excellent presentations, each telling a slightly different story, but all adding up to a huge capability and a lot happening in Northern Ireland and on the island as a whole. So I'd invite questions to our 4 speakers. If you would identify yourself, please, and the organisation you represent, and the speaker to whom you're addressing the question. Thank you. Jerry.
Jerry Grant, RPS. I was very encouraged by the focus on forward planning and forward viewing, and particularly strategic planning as a context within which projects would be planned in a coherent way. I think that came through in the various speakers, and I'm certainly looking forward, John, to seeing the same thing in Irish Water, where strategic planning for 10 and 20 years hence becomes, if you like, the matrix within which things happen. The thing that probably strikes me, in picking up on some of the project experience that Bob went through, is that the public doesn't really get this, and we're not communicating it very well. And it seems to me that there's a lost opportunity there, because we know that we need community support behind successful projects to get them delivered. And to some extent, a lot of this good stuff, particularly the sort of 10, 20-year forward visions, is not really being communicated. We're presumably not doing it. I mean, I would think the President deserves a lot of credit for his work this year with the universities and going around the universities and perhaps bringing that to the public a bit. But I think there's a huge challenge there. I'd like a comment if say about
it. Yeah, I think it's a very fair point. I think certainly when we started to look at water probably about 2 years ago, and more recently, I would prioritise the challenges in the following order. I think messaging, communications, public corporate affairs would be one. I think there's huge probably ER/IR challenges in integrating the whole business. I think funding in time will be a problem, but that's probably maybe 2 years away. And I think it's not in any way to undermine it. I think engineering we can do. I think that would be the 4th challenge. But I think that would be how I would rank them in terms of priority. And I totally agree with you. I don't think that we communicate enough in an engineering sense the successes that we've had, and I think we need to manage that better. Certainly, as we go through the challenge, as I mentioned earlier, in the role of establishing Irish Water, I think that will be a very, very important part of the public who are now going to pay for the service, understand what's being done, how it's being done, and as we meet the various milestones, that we've met the various milestones that we've set, as we set for ourselves. I think that's going to be very, very important. And I probably, in my presentation, I probably didn't touch on it, but at the end of the day, anything we do in this should be geared towards providing the customer with a value proposition and efficient service. That should be the ultimate aim in all the decisions we make. But I totally agree with you, Jerry. I think the communications will be a huge part of it.
Thanks, John. Yes, at the very back, Brian.
Brian Hastey, Cork City Council. Question for Bob. Bob, you spoke about a lack of leadership in the public service compared to the private sector. Leadership is a very broad word, and I'd be curious to know if you could expand a bit on it as to where do you see that lack of leadership? Is it at a political level, at a senior management level, or where you perceive that lack of leadership to be?
That's Brian. Bob.
Oh, I'm going to get into so much trouble. Well, partly it's the system, and partly we have to think short and medium term in politics. And if you're a servant of politics, you have to compromise a bit. While you need to plan long term, and you need to do the strategic planning, and you need to communicate it better, I absolutely agree with the previous point. You have to live within the 4 or 5 year administration lifetimes and plan for starting up again under a new administration. So there's always a bit of you won't get the long-term vision over the line if you're not also on a day-to-day basis delivering the short-term stuff to keep the politicians happy. But it's not the management in the public sector. The management is generally very, very good. It's the interaction with those very good managers in the outside world. The previous question touched on that as well. We don't do enough of it so that the outside world is suspicious of us when we do, and then we have to spend a lot of time fixing things afterwards and defending what's been done and explaining things what we've done. It absolutely would be much more efficient to communicate upfront at the beginning and then not have to continually explain afterwards. But we've never geared up for doing that. It's interesting, we are looking a little bit at other countries, and there's a bit of a European initiative to try and look at best practice in consultation and best practice in government communication strategy. But we have a long way to go. It's absolutely not the quality of management in the public sector. It's the linkages and the interfaces and the communications with the outside world. That is a leadership function, and that's the bit we don't do well.
And I see a lot of heads up here agreeing with that. Yes, at the back, Jerry.
Jerry Byrne, I'd just like to make comment on manufacturing engineering. I really welcomed some of the comments that were made in the talks. I do think that manufacturing engineering has been through quite a challenging time, particularly the maybe disconnect between industry and the universities. I think the world of manufacturing has changed a lot. I think we shouldn't look at it in a local sense, but for me it's changed to be more a service, an internationally traded service, which is Ireland being a major part of the supply chain. And if we just reflect on the last 10 years, in academia we have found it extremely difficult to fill posts in the area of manufacturing. Indeed, undergraduate programs have been pretty well, maybe I shouldn't use the word decimated, but they've been extremely challenged. So I think we have a very serious job of work to do in terms of, first of all, presenting manufacturing engineering as being as important as it truly is for us. I think we have to also, at the university side and the Institutes of Technology side, reinvigorate so that we really do have the people coming through with these, for the high value add jobs that we're talking about in manufacturing. I think we have to achieve that. And just as a final point I would make, for me, I don't separate manufacturing from design. And so I think for job creation in Ireland, the link between design and manufacturing has to be there, and we should be bringing in and developing the high-end jobs in design, and then seeing the value chain through to the international supply chain. So I think currently we haven't developed anything as well as we should have done in the last 10 years, so there's a serious job of work for all of us to do. And so I welcome some of the comments there. So my point, President, I don't think it's not so much a question as an observation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Maybe Liam or Jeremy want to make some comment on that, though. Jerry is the head of engineering in UCD.
Yeah, maybe I can say one of probably the most successful programs that we have been involved in from almost day one is a technology transfer program. And there used to be quite a number of technology transfer initiatives on both sides of the border. In the north, there was a teaching company scheme, and there were similar schemes in the south. But they seemed to, certainly in the south, they seemed to fall away, that direct interface between academia, business, graduates. And we introduced our Fusion program, and quite a sizable number, we've now done way over 200 of those projects, and a lot of them are involved in the area of manufacturing engineering. And there's a great appetite among academics who haven't had the opportunity for many years to get involved in interface with companies. But that opportunity has come. They're grasping it and really benefiting from that access and interface with companies which they didn't normally get. And I now see the governments in both jurisdictions. I think just this morning, Jeremy, Invest Northern Ireland are announcing quite a major investment into the teaching company scheme again. And I know that Enterprise Ireland are looking very closely at getting more involved in technology transfer. And I think that's a win-win for everybody.
Maybe we could translate some of that experience to the south, by the sound of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jeremy.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we faced is that, or we all face, is that we live in a world where people are driven by what the media is saying, and particularly in software engineering in the north, what we found is post the bursting of the internet boom bubble, a lot of people didn't want to go into software engineering, or more recently, we've had quite a bit of success in securing investments from financial services technology companies, but what we found is people were reluctant to go into banking just because of the bad reputation that banking had. Yet none of the investors here, whether it's Allstate or Citigroup or New York Stock Exchange, They continue to employ people during that downturn because of the business proposition that Northern Ireland offered, but fewer people were going into those subjects because of what the media said. So it's a big battle, and I think the message is, from an engineering perspective, is to think about, well, what is it in your jobs that you do that you are proud of, that you know that you're adding value. I know that, can we all say that we really enjoy all of our jobs all of the time, but there's certain parts of our jobs that we think, yes, that's attractive and I like it for this reason. And how do we get that message out to someone who is 12 years old or 14 years old or 16 years old, who are choosing subjects now, to make sure that they choose maths and physics and the other STEM subjects that are there, so that they keep their options open? And the reason that video that I just shown was produced was to be used by careers teachers. That was to try and get that message across, that engineering and manufacturing is something that is exciting. But we need the companies to join with us in that and say and get that message out to the young people as well.
Thanks, Jeremy. Just in that context as well, you know, maybe everybody in this room haven't seen the Engineers Ireland ad that's out on Sky and RT, which is intended to attract graduates towards engineering, with an emphasis on the newer types of engineering, you know, renewables and biomedical, computing, gaming, and so on. And I very much commend that ad. It's actually running in the stand here on Engineers Ireland, and it's on the homepage of the website. In fact, you've got to click off it if you go onto the Engineers Ireland website. Possibly people have not seen it. Just make that point. Any other questions?
Eddie McDonald from AME. Perhaps Jeremy or Liam, would either of you be prepared to give a 2 to 5 year outlook in the province here in terms of rebalancing our own economy, particularly with regard to the public sector changes that needs to happen?
Well, do you want to take that?
I was just going to ask for a little bit of clarification on the public sector changes you're referring to.
Yes, our reliance on the public sector for revenue streams, Jeremy's what I'm talking about.
Well, as I said, that's one of the reasons why Owen Paterson has put such an emphasis on trying to get a changed corporation tax for Northern Ireland. We are over-reliant. Any change like this is just going to take a long period of time. But when you look at what has happened over the last 20 or 30 years, and you look at GVA or some of those other metrics, we really haven't moved. You know, it's stayed the same. Unemployment fluctuates according to what's happening in the world economy, but GVA in Northern Ireland compared to the UK average is consistently about 80%. And we need some major policy change to drive something like that. And that's why I think it's good for all of us that a lower corporation tax in the north is a positive thing. As I said before, I look enviously at what is in the south. Whoever came up with that idea is a genius, because when I get measured on inward investment into the island of Ireland, the Republic certainly does a lot better than Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with largely what Jeremy's saying up there. But I think there's a point that is missed in a little argument about the size of the public sector. There's almost an expectation that if you decrease public sector reliance, the private sector is going to automatically grow. That does not follow. Quite apart from taking steps to rationalise the public sector offering, we need to take serious, game-changing efforts to increase private sector productivity, etc. And I agree that corporation tax is one way to achieving that. There's a bit of concern that it seems sometimes it's the only tool in the box, that, you know, the only thing that people are seeing that will make that game-changing sort of impact on the Northern Ireland economy. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but it would be a very key component if we were to achieve it.
Corporation tax is not the answer to all ills. And if there was one common theme that is probably more important, it's innovation. Innovation, and Liam referred to that in his presentation. But certainly what we're trying to do in West Northern Ireland is how can we help the businesses here become more competitive, and how can we help the engineers in those companies look at how can we do things better. And certainly the incentives that are available for research and development are far higher than for anything else. On that basis, we need to innovate. And you ask Terex, why is it that they are so successful in producing all this mobile screening equipment? And they will say innovation. I went out to see a small company in Lisburn yesterday, and they simply make blinds. It's Decor Blinds. They've announced 80 new jobs. And I'm thinking, what is stopping these jobs from going to India or to China? And there are 400 people doing this, and they simply said innovation. And right across the board, that's the answer that you get all of the time.
Yeah. John, thanks, Jeremy. And Bob.
For people's information, is that BG has invested to date hundreds of millions in infrastructure in the north through the 2 pipelines I mentioned earlier, but also through our Thermos Energy company who are supplying distribution to the 10 towns outside of Belfast. And on top of that, and again it may or may not be widely known, but we're also doing feasibility of building a Larne storage project in Larne, the salt caverns in Larne. Because as Bob has mentioned, as more and more renewables come on the system, the gas grid needs to be able to respond quicker to when the renewables come off. And that's in conjunction, well, it's the energy company of our business, our organisation are doing that, but it's in conjunction with GDF Suez. And that certainly is a very, very interesting and very big engineering challenge if that comes to fruition. And finally, we're also looking at investing in a biomass plant in the docks in Belfast. And I think that represents hundreds of millions investment in Northern Ireland by BG.
Okay, thanks, John. Bob.
Just 2 points to address the question. The first is, of course, that if you look at the history of the 2 economies on the island, Ireland, Republic of, didn't have the same heavy industry as Northern Ireland did, and therefore found structural adjustment easier and quicker to implement, and is therefore much further along that road. The move away from heavy industry in Northern Ireland is slow and complex, and takes a bit longer, so that is also part of the equation. The other thing is that, and partly as a result of what Bord Gáis and others are doing, there are big changes in the energy system dynamics in the country. I mentioned briefly single electricity market, which came in 2007. Now, there are huge economy of scale benefits arising and are measurable already from having joined up the 2 systems, the 2 markets on the island. That's continuing saving for business and industry. That's money that's in the pocket that wouldn't be in the pocket if we hadn't done that. We're doing the same sort of thing in gas. It's a slow, complicated process, and it will result in savings. So the kind of big infrastructural things that are happening around the place will help individuals and businesses by letting them keep more of their own money in the long term.
Thank you, Bob, for that. Any more questions? Yes, at the back.
Hello, Paul Butler from Enterprise Ireland. I just want to say a little bit about Enterprise Ireland, what Enterprise Ireland is doing in relation to what Bob is talking about, and about operating interagency. And I think what has traditionally been happening in the past is that people have been integrating at a very high level within organisations, and I think we're seeing a change in that now, where we're coming down through the organisations, and there's been a bit more proactiveness in terms of interaction there. I was delighted to see the 1.5 minute clip there that Jeremy had at the very end. I think it's vitally important, and this is leading on from Jerry's point earlier on, that it is quite difficult sometimes to fill various engineering roles, and instilling that natural inquisitiveness at a secondary level is very, very important. And in fact, I would say that it goes right back to primary level, because engineers are naturally inquisitive. And if I could quote William Butler Yeats, he would say that education is not just about filling a pail, it's about lighting a fire. And that's something that we have to do within the engineering profession for the benefit of all of society in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Any comments on that? Or more comment on the question? Any other questions? We're coming up to the networking session, where I suppose this discussion can continue in private. But before we transform into that, are there any final questions? Doesn't look like it. Okay. Well, I might get some assistance from Finola in terms of the arrangements for the networking break, kindly sponsored, I have to say, by Bord na Móna. So thanks to Bord na Móna for that.